I stood at my partner's graveside in a black dress I had picked out the night before, holding the hands of our 3 children, believing, the way you believe in oxygen, the way you believe in the ground beneath your feet, that I was burying the man who had loved me for 30 years. And then the cars pulled up. A woman stepped out first, dressed in widow's black,
veil,
diamond ring catching the morning light. Behind her, 2 teenage children who had his nose, his jawline, his exact way of standing with their shoulders slightly forward. She walked to the other side of the casket. She did not look at me with surprise. She looked at me the way someone looks at a piece of furniture they ordered a long time ago and are finally done using. That was the moment I understood. I had not been his partner. I had not been his secret. I had been his arrangement. And the woman standing across that casket from me, the woman I had never once heard his name linked to, had built that arrangement herself. She had chosen me. She had approved me. She had watched me carry 3 children into the world, and she had called every single one of them hers. My name is Celestine Morrow. And what I did after that funeral, what I found, what I proved, and what I made the entire world see, is not a story about heartbreak. It is a story about what happens when a woman who is used as a vessel decides to become a weapon. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Celestine Morrow was 24 years old when she met Fitzgerald Hale at a jazz evening in downtown Memphis. He was 40, polished in the way that older men sometimes are, not flashy but considered. Every detail of him looked chosen. He wore a watch that didn't try too hard. He asked her questions and actually listened to the answers. He laughed at the right moments and went quiet at the right moments, and when he looked at her, she felt like the only fixed point in a moving room. He told her, within the first 3 conversations, that he had never been married. He told her he had always wanted a family, but that the right woman had never arrived at the right time. He told her that he believed in commitment without ceremony, that a piece of paper meant nothing compared to a life genuinely built together. Celestine, who had grown up watching her parents' documented marriage dissolve into documented misery, found this romantic. She would spend 26 years regretting how romantic she had found it. What Celestine did not know, what she was never meant to know, was that Fitzgerald Hale had been married for 6 years before he met her. His wife's name was Rosalind Hale. Rosalind was 43, the daughter of a prominent Memphis family, a woman of considerable social standing and considerable private anguish. She had been diagnosed 3 years into her marriage to Fitzgerald with a condition that made carrying a pregnancy to term almost certainly impossible. Multiple specialists, multiple consultations. The same answer every time. Rosalind Hale wanted children more than she had ever wanted anything. And Rosalind Hale was not a woman who accepted impossibility without finding a way around it. Stay with me, because in a few minutes I'm going to tell you exactly how Rosalind found Celestine. Not how Fitzgerald found her. How Rosalind found her. And when you understand what that means, what that process actually looked like, the entire story changes. Fitzgerald and Rosalind had an agreement. This is the part that will make your stomach turn. It was not a casual, unspoken understanding. It was not something that evolved slowly and ambiguously over time. It was a deliberate, structured arrangement that Rosalind had proposed and Fitzgerald had accepted, because Fitzgerald Hale was, above all other things, a man who understood that his wife's family money was the foundation every good thing in his life was built on. The arrangement was this. Rosalind would identify a suitable woman. Young, healthy, without strong family ties in Memphis, intelligent enough to raise children well, but without the social connections or legal sophistication to cause problems. Fitzgerald would build a genuine relationship with her, not a transaction, a relationship, because Rosalind understood that a woman who felt genuinely loved would give more completely, would be less suspicious, would ask fewer questions. The children born from that relationship would be documented, through private legal arrangements Rosalind's family attorney had quietly constructed, as children Rosalind intended to claim in the event of Fitzgerald's death or the relationship's end. Rosalind had found Celestine through a woman who worked in the HR department of the hospital where Celestine worked as a nurse. A quiet inquiry. The right demographic. The right profile. She had shown Fitzgerald a photograph before their first meeting. She had approved the introduction. She had monitored the relationship's early stages through a mutual acquaintance she had placed carefully in Celestine's social circle. When Celestine became pregnant for the first time, a daughter, born when Celestine was 27, Rosalind wept privately in her own home with a satisfaction that she later described to her sister as the closest thing to joy she had felt in years. She had her child. She just needed Celestine to raise her for a while. Celestine, across those 26 years, had given Fitzgerald 3 children. Amara, the eldest, was 25 at the time of the funeral. Kofi was 22. Little Bram, short for Abram, a name Celestine had chosen herself, was 19. These children were everything to her, the architecture of her entire adult life. She had stayed in Memphis when she might have moved. She had turned down a hospital administrative position that would have required relocation. She had built her world deliberately small and deliberately centered on these 3 people and the man she believed had chosen her. She had never once, in 26 years, had reason to search Fitzgerald Hale's name in a way that went beyond the ordinary. She had never once met Rosalind. She did not know Rosalind existed. Fitzgerald died on a Wednesday in March. Cardiac arrest. He had complained of chest tightness for 3 days and had called it indigestion and had not gone to the doctor, and then he was simply gone at 66 years old, in the way that stubborn men sometimes go, suddenly, without the drama of a proper goodbye. Celestine planned the funeral herself. She notified his colleagues. She ordered flowers. She picked a casket. She chose the cemetery plot, the music, the scripture reading. Nobody called her to say she shouldn't. Nobody called her to say anything at all, because nobody who knew the other side of Fitzgerald Hale's life had any reason to believe she was planning a funeral she had no legal right to plan. The day was cold and gray, and the magnolia trees in the cemetery had not yet bloomed. Celestine stood with Amara on her left and Kofi on her right, Bram just behind her with his hand on her shoulder. The minister was speaking. The small gathering of colleagues and neighbors stood in respectful silence. And then the cars arrived. 2 black SUVs pulling slowly along the cemetery road, stopping 20 yards from the grave. Celestine noticed them the way you notice something that doesn't fit, not with alarm, not immediately, just with the small cognitive friction of a detail that doesn't belong. The woman who stepped out of the first car was impeccably dressed. Veil, gloves, a composure so complete it looked architectural. Behind her, 2 teenagers, a boy and a girl, both wearing the formal stillness of children who had been coached on how to behave at something important. They walked toward the grave. The minister faltered almost imperceptibly. The woman took her position on the opposite side of the casket, and she looked at Celestine, not with surprise, not with grief, not with any of the emotions a woman would wear if she had just discovered, at her husband's funeral, that another woman was there. She looked at Celestine with the flat, finished expression of someone closing a chapter they had already read. Don't you dare leave, because what Rosalind said to Celestine at that graveside, in front of everyone, is the coldest thing I have ever had to put into words. And it is the exact moment that turned Celestine Morrow from a grieving woman into something entirely different. Stay right there. The minister finished. People began to move, speaking in low voices, offering condolences. Rosalind walked around the casket with the unhurried precision of a woman who had been planning this moment for a very long time. She stopped in front of Celestine. She said, quietly enough that only Celestine and her children could hear, "You've done a beautiful job with them. I want you to know that." Celestine stared at her. Rosalind continued, "The attorneys will be in contact within the week regarding the transition arrangements. Fitzgerald estate, as his legal spouse, transfers entirely to me. The house you're living in is in his name. I'd suggest you begin making arrangements." Amara said, "What?" Rosalind looked at her, looked at Fitzgerald's daughter with a proprietary warmth that made Celestine's blood go cold, and said, "I'm your father's wife, sweetheart. We have a lot to talk about. All of us." Then she turned and walked back to her car. Her 2 teenagers followed her. She did not look back. The drive home from that cemetery was the longest of Celestine's life. Her children were asking questions she could not answer. Her hands on the steering wheel were steady, not because she was calm, but because she had entered a state that exists past calm, past shock, past grief. A state of pure, cold, absolute clarity. She put her children to bed that night the way she had put them to bed 10,000 times before. She sat on the edge of Bram's mattress for a moment longer than usual. She smoothed Amara's hair the way she had when Amara was 4 years old. She stood in the hallway outside Kofi's door and listened to him breathe. Then she went to her kitchen table and sat down alone in the dark and began to think. Celestine Morrow was 50 years old and had spent 26 years as a nurse. She was not a woman unfamiliar with crisis. She was not a woman who broke when the situation required her to hold. She was not, as Rosalind Hale had clearly assumed, without resources. She had something Rosalind had not factored into her very careful calculations. She had 26 years of Fitzgerald. His emails on a shared family tablet he had never thought to clear. Letters he had written her that she had kept in a box under the bed. Handwritten letters, specific and personal and dated. Photographs spanning 2.5 decades. Her children's birth certificates, on which Fitzgerald Hale was listed as father. Medical records from 3 pregnancies that she had documented with the thoroughness of a nurse who understood that records matter. And she had something else. A memory. A specific memory from 11 years ago, when Fitzgerald had come home after too much bourbon at a colleague's retirement dinner and had said something that hadn't made complete sense at the time, that she had filed away without understanding, the way you file away a detail that doesn't yet have a context. He had said, "Rosalind always gets what she wants. That's the one thing I'll give her. She always finds a way." Celestine had asked who Rosalind was. He had said an old family connection, nothing important, and changed the subject. She had let it go. She did not let it go now. Because what Celestine found when she started pulling that thread, that single name from a bourbon-loosened moment 11 years ago, is the thing that gave her everything she needed. Not to survive Rosalind Hale. To destroy her. Stay with me. The attorney's letter arrived 5 days after the funeral. It was exactly what Rosalind had promised. Clinical. Thorough. The house, held in Fitzgerald's name, was part of the estate. The estate transferred to Rosalind as legal spouse. Celestine had 30 days to vacate. The letter made no mention of the children. That omission told Celestine everything she needed to know about Rosalind's confidence level. Rosalind believed Celestine had no legal standing, no marriage, no documented claim to anything. Just 3 children whose birth certificates listed a dead man as their father, a dead man whose estate now belonged to someone else. Rosalind believed she was dealing with a woman who had nothing. She had spent 26 years carefully ensuring that Celestine would have nothing. What Rosalind had not anticipated was that Celestine had spent 3 weeks doing what any intelligent, methodical woman does when she discovers she has been deceived on an architectural scale. She had started documenting the deception itself. Celestine found the HR woman through Fitzgerald's old emails. A name, a reference, a meeting arranged through his account 5 months before they met. She found the mutual acquaintance, a woman named Dorinda, who had been in Celestine's life for the first 4 years of her relationship with Fitzgerald, and then drifted away with no explanation. She found correspondence between Fitzgerald and Rosalind's family attorney that Fitzgerald had stored, with breathtaking arrogance, in a folder on the shared family tablet labeled property. She found the private legal arrangement, a document, drawn up by Rosalind's family attorney, that outlined, in precise and horrifying language, the custodial intentions Rosalind had always held regarding any children born from Fitzgerald's relationship with Celestine. The document was not legally enforceable in any straightforward sense. It had never been filed, never been court-ordered, had no standing that Celestine's own attorney, a woman named Venetia Cross, couldn't challenge. But it was something far more valuable than a legal instrument. It was proof. Proof that this had been planned. Proof that Rosalind Hale had deliberately, consciously, constructed an arrangement in which another woman would be used. Her body, her labor, her love, her 26 years, as a reproductive and domestic resource for a couple who could not have children of their own. Proof that Rosalind had not simply benefited from Fitzgerald's deception. She had engineered it. Venetia Cross, family law attorney, reviewed everything Celestine brought her and sat quietly for a long moment. Then she said, "She made one mistake. One single mistake in what is otherwise a very carefully constructed plan. The mistake was the document itself. Because Rosalind's family attorney had drafted it, had put it in writing, had created a paper record of intent that directly implicated Rosalind in a deliberate scheme to deceive a woman for the purpose of obtaining children she could not biologically produce. In Tennessee, that document was not a custodial agreement. It was evidence of fraud, of emotional abuse, of a conspiracy to deceive. And it was drafted on the letterhead of a law firm whose senior partner, Rosalind's family attorney, was a man with a spotless reputation, an active license, and absolutely no desire to be connected to a document that was about to become very, very public. Venetia looked at Celestine and said, "What do you want?" Celestine said, "I want her to never be able to pretend this was acceptable to anyone, ever." What Celestine did next was not a lawsuit. It was not a press release. It was something much more precise, much more devastating, and much more permanent. And it worked because she understood something about Rosalind Hale that Rosalind had never expected her to understand. Don't move. Rosalind Hale was not merely a private woman with a secret. She was the chairwoman of a Memphis-based Children's Welfare Foundation, an organization she had built over 15 years, that bore her family name, that had received significant press coverage and several civic awards, and that positioned her publicly as a woman devoted to the protection and well-being of children. The irony was so complete it was almost elegant. Celestine understood that Rosalind's reputation was not just her pride. It was her identity. It was the structure she had built to replace the things she couldn't have. The public image of a woman whose entire life was oriented toward children. She had just never been able to claim the specific children she had arranged to have. Until now, she had believed she was about to. Celestine did not go to the press first. She went to the Foundation's board of directors. All 9 of them, individually, with a package that Venetia had prepared, a factual, documented, precisely organized presentation of what Rosalind had done. The emails, the HR connection, the planted acquaintance, the legal document, the timeline of 26 years, mapped against Rosalind's own public statements about family, children, and ethical stewardship. She gave them 72 hours to respond before she contacted a journalist. She chose a journalist she had already spoken to, a woman at a Nashville-based investigative outlet who covered family law and women's issues, who had spent an hour on the phone with Celestine listening, and who had said, very quietly at the end of that call, "This is the most extraordinary thing I've heard in 15 years of this work." The board did not respond within 72 hours. So Celestine called the journalist. The story ran on a Thursday morning. By Friday, it had been picked up by 4 national outlets. By the following Monday, Rosalind Hale's foundation had received resignation letters from 3 board members and had lost its 2 largest corporate donors. By the end of that week, the Tennessee Board of Professional Responsibility had received a formal complaint regarding the family attorney who had drafted the document that was now reproduced, in relevant part, in every article about the story. Rosalind did not make a public statement. Her attorney released 2 sentences saying she denied the characterization of events and would not be commenting further. The silence was catastrophic, because the document existed. The emails existed. The testimony of the HR employee, who had been located, who had agreed to speak to the journalist on background, who had clearly been carrying the weight of what she knew for a very long time, existed. Rosalind had no counter-narrative because the paper trail Celestine had assembled left no room for one. The House question resolved itself within 30 days. Not because Rosalind withdrew her claim, she did not initially, but because Venetia Cross filed a civil action that introduced the custodial document into the public court record, which meant it became accessible to anyone, and which meant that Rosalind's attorney advised her, strongly, that continuing to pursue the eviction of the woman she had conspired to deceive, while that conspiracy was now national news, was not a battle she could win in any courtroom in the state. Rosalind's attorneys negotiated a settlement. Celestine was not evicted. The two children Rosalind had raised, her husband's children from another undisclosed relationship earlier in his life, Celestine later learned, because Fitzgerald Hale had apparently been very consistent in his methods, were not Celestine's concern, and she wished them no harm. They were victims of their own kind. But Amara, Kofi, and Bram stayed home, with their mother, in their house. What happened to Rosalind Hale is not a small thing, and I will not pretend it is. The foundation dissolved within 4 months. Not dramatically, it simply became impossible to operate. Donors did not return. The staff resigned quietly. The building sat empty. The family attorney faced a disciplinary hearing. His license was not revoked. These things rarely move that cleanly, but the hearing was public, the finding of a professional conduct violation was public, and his name was attached to the case in every search result for the rest of his career. Rosalind sold the family home and relocated. Where precisely, Celestine did not know and did not seek to find out. What she knew was this. Every public thing Rosalind had built, the name, the reputation, the image of a woman who loved and protected children, had been disassembled in the same way Rosalind had built her arrangement with Celestine. Quietly, methodically, one piece at a time. Celestine Morrow is 51 years old now. She still works as a nurse. She requested a transfer to a different department after everything. She needed the change, she said, and the hospital gave it to her without question. Amara is in graduate school in Atlanta. Kofi is working. Bram is finishing his second year of college. They know everything. Celestine sat with them, together, in the kitchen where she had fed them every morning of their lives, and she told them the truth completely and without softening it. She answered every question they had. She let them be angry and confused and grieving something they couldn't name, the version of their father they had believed in for as long as they needed to be. She did not tell them what to feel about Fitzgerald. She told them only this. The fact that he deceived her did not change a single morning, a single dinner, a single school play or hospital visit or ordinary Tuesday that they had lived together as a family. Those were real. Those had always been real. The lies were his. The life was theirs. She was asked by the journalist who wrote the story whether she felt any sympathy for Rosalind. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I understand what it is to want a child. I understand that grief. What I cannot understand, what I will never understand, is deciding that the answer to your grief is to use another woman's body, her heart, her entire life, without her knowledge or consent. That's not grief. That's entitlement. And entitlement dressed up as sorrow is still entitlement." The journalist included that quote in full. It became the most shared line of the piece. There is one more thing. After the story ran, after the board resignations and the donor withdrawals and the attorney's hearing, Celestine received a letter. No return address. Memphis postmark. Inside was a single piece of paper.
No salutation. No signature.
For words. You were always enough. Celestine held that letter for a long time. Then she folded it carefully, walked to the back of her garden, and burned it. She did not need Rosalind's remorse. She did not need Rosalind's acknowledgement. She did not need anything from that woman, not her foundation, not her family money, not her approval, not her guilt. What she needed was exactly what she had built for herself, in that house, with those 3 children over 26 years. And it was still standing. Only now it was entirely, irrevocably, legally hers. If this story found you at the right moment, share it. Drop a comment and tell us which part stopped your breath. And if you know a woman who has been used and has come out the other side still standing, this one is for her.